Okay, folks, it's that time again. Glyphs, go! Number 9 is on the ground floor along the wall of Santa Maria Assunta, and it looks a bit, generic, don't it? Well, how's about this? This right here is a picture of Machu Picchu in Peru. The scribblings you see on the lower end of the glyph are the ruins. The Incans constructed Machu Picchu in 1450, though the Spanish conquistadors, in addition to smallpox, ensured that it was vacated by the 16th century. There are several theories as to what its purpose was, but the most prominent one is that it was a holy site. The surrounding mountains were sacred to the Incas, and building a structure on one of the highest points in a sacred ground would definitely mean it was of some pretty major importance. The stonework also is said to be in line with what you'd find at ritual sites that Incans used in their other ruins, so that's also another solid indicator. Another theory is that this place was designed for coronations, or it was even meant to be a home for the gods.
Three thefts, hidden by the murders. People only see what they're trained to see, what the organization wants them to see.
So, these should be familiar, given their past discussion. First display, Houdini. Piece of Eden is over his midsection where he was punched. Next is Gandhi. Same thing, piece of Eden over his heart, where he was shot. Pretty basic.
The wolves are out hunting. Where has Jack gone?
Another Caesar cipher. To the left corner, we can see 6 equals 1, so we can figure it out from there. As for the pictures, well, maybe you've spotted a few familiar faces, or scenes. For those who don't, all of these pertain to John Fitzgerald Kennedy, 35th President of the United States. He was assassinated November 22nd, 1963 in Dallas, Texas, by Lee Harvey Oswald. It's also a pretty huge center point for tinfoil hattery in regards to conspiracy theories, magic bullets, grassy knolls, etc. As per written in the Constitution, should the president pass away, the vice president would step in to lead in his stead. His vice president was Lyndon Baines Johnson, formerly a senator from Texas. Now, this unlocks a letter. I'll talk over it, but feel free to pause and read it, of course. Given the overall tone and the bad guy juju this letter gives off, I'm willing to bet that it's written by the Templars. It mentions F being unwilling to cooperate with them, most likely referring to JFK. Next, the details mention PE1 and PE2, Piece of Eden. PE3 is the presidential apple that Washington and FDR made use of in the previous segments. So this was a controlled way for them to take him out and ensure the apple didn't get lost in the process. Oswald is Lee Harvey Oswald, the shooter. Z refers to Abraham Zapruder. Zapruder was the man who filmed what is easily the most researched version of the footage at the scene when JFK was shot. Seems if Oswald failed, Zapruder was to step in, and as I mentioned, he was in kind of an ideal position for filming this, so I guess they are claiming in this world that he was put there in a perfect spot. In case Oswald failed, he'd be in a good spot to step in and wrap it up. Also, the X is referring to the grassy knoll, so it seems they used a piece of Eden to make something appear. I don't know. Also, along the buildings, you'll notice a digit code. This is our passcode for the glyph, meaning we're done here. So, on to the next glyph. This is found on the southern face of the Torre del Salvucci. It is an Eastern-style pair of buildings, but to be more specific, it is a Japanese-style pagoda. Pagodas were places of worship in the East, typically Buddhist in nature. They usually exhibit this tiered eave sort of design. Regarding the era it's from, I've seen mention of it being from the Nara period, but I'm not sure why it was tagged as that in particular, because the preceding era of the Asuka period from 538 to 710 AD is where pagodas took on this more recognizable design, I think, particularly nearing the latter half of the period. Kind of an architectural renaissance took place, I suppose. This is somewhat due to the surge in Buddhism, and from my admittedly limited knowledge on this front, I can't honestly tag either of these as being, referring to particular pagodas, or if they're just meant to be generic Japanese pagoda drawings. But enough of that. Glyph time.
Something was up there. Something abandoned long ago.
Something abandoned. And Apollo. What can this mean? And space! Given the previous glyph's details, the Templars didn't agree with JFK regarding the Apollo missions. They were actually the brainchild of JFK's predecessor Eisenhower, but JFK was pushing pretty heavily for space exploration. On this display, we've also got a Big Pen cipher. It reads, Johnson was one of them. The Bees drone 2. Follow the money. So clearly it's stating that Lyndon Baines Johnson, or LBJ, was a Templar. Well, he honestly, from all accounts, he was kind of a dick, so I'm not gonna, rule that out. The Bees drone 2. That probably means that the mission itself, possibly including the personnel, were Templars, or they were somehow forced into it using another piece of Eden. The drone in question here is Apollo 11, which is carrying Neil Armstrong, Michael Collins, and Edwin Buzz Aldrin. Ugh. Rings! 1, 2, skip a few. Hey, we're done. Also, you'll notice a quote of Kennedy's at the bottom side of the screen. It's slightly altered in that what we see here leaves off the latter end of the sentence. The original continues, and finally, to destroy the hopes of the world's newest nations, and they have the ambition to do it before the end of this decade, which, leaving off the latter end of it, makes it seem more ominous, ominous and actually fitting in to sort of foreshadowing about the Templars. Next is a picture for your perusal, and it also has some multiple hidden goodies inside of it, I guess you could say. You see the title here? Apollo 11 photograph released to the public. But if we sweep our magic little box over it, there's a hidden note. Original unreleased negative. So if we scan the flag here, we see the Abstergo logo. Over here, we can see the Templar emblem. Just in case you had doubts. Why would the Templars be so keen on space exploration? Well, looky here. Piece of Eden number 5, another apple.
With Jack deep underground, it was easy.
And that is what's referring to as far as something being left behind. Next is atop the Torre del Diavolo, the Eye of Providence. Fun times. This has a bit of history and plagiarism behind it, in all honesty, in regards to how we use it here in the West, in the US in particular. It's known typically as, the all-seeing eye. Its design really closely resembles the Eye of Horus, as well as the Eye of the World within Buddhist scriptures. It also stems from Shiva's third eye within Hinduism, which was located upon his forehead. The third eye was supposed to be, quote, all-powerful and all-seeing. It can be seen on the US $1 bill, and it is also a symbol utilized, of course, by the Freemasons. It means that all deeds and thoughts are observed by God. The lines or rays on the sides are symbolic of glory. Additionally, the triangle around it is representative of the Holy Trinity, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. And the eye, of course, is God.
He wanted to stop the cycle, to tell the secret. Ugh, shit! I've got to keep thinking through the headaches.
It seems like Subject 16 is really starting to lose it at this point. So what we have here is a letter from Nikola Tesla, and I'll start off talking while giving y'all time to peruse the letter. I'll be going all over the place here covering his past, but there are a number of things in history regarding Tesla that are relevant to the goings-on here. And as I go through, I'll kind of point them out. And on that note, we start off with an important point, so remember this. Tesla was born near modern-day Croatia, and remember that. Specifically within the Austro-Hungarian Empire. The exact place is known as Smiljan, which is inside Lika, and I assume Lika is a province of sorts. And he was born on July 10th, 1856. His father, Milutin, was a Serbian Orthodox priest, and his mother, Juka Mandic, fiddled around and somewhat invented things around the house using the appliances and stuff they had access to. And most records also state that his mother was incredibly smart in spite of having no formal education. I think we can see which of the two he probably took after. Goes without saying for most folks who are in the know, but Tesla was pretty freaking smart. Case in point, Tesla's memory was likely one of the keenest to ever grace a human being. I mean, he was said to be capable of doing entire blueprints and schematics for devices within his head and memorizing them. This is a major reason behind why actual handwritten schematics of his are so rare. He did not need them, ever. We aren't talking about assembling a kitchen table in his noggin, folks. He had incredibly complex structures committed to memory down to the nuts, bolts, and dimensions. Thing is, he was also seen as an eccentric. Why is that? Well, he had a number of mental health issues and quirks. Something that kind of caused some of these issues. He had an older brother named Daniel, and Daniel died in an accident when Tesla was very young. Thing is, Daniel was older, of course, and he was apparently the favorite child. And his parents had a habit of comparing the two of them as a result. And apparently Tesla was just never good enough in the eyes of his parents. And he was also stuck chasing a ghost from the get-go, if you want to wax poetics over it. And possibly as a result of Daniel's death, Nikola began to develop really severe night terrors, and he hallucinated very frequently. These night terrors may or may not have passed in time, but Tesla's mind really had a habit of playing tricks on him all the time, apparently. He also had some very weird phobias and obsessions. Pearls? He loved them. Perfectly crafted jewelry was just a complete marvel to this guy, but other people's hair? Hated it. He avoided touching hair as much as possible. He also counted his steps typically whenever he was walking from one place to another. Also, at some point in his later years, he began calculating the cubic volume of his meals. If he failed to do that, or he made a mistake and it didn't sit right with him, he couldn't eat the meal. It kind of goes without saying, genius is kind of a mental disorder to a degree rather than an ability. This sort of thinking, though, the always thinking, always working mind, is to think for his success. And to quote Arthur Schopenhauer, talent is hitting a target nobody else can hit, but genius is hitting a target nobody else can see. So Tesla made it through his basic levels of education prior to college well ahead of schedule. He dropped out of 2 different universities, possibly due to disinterest in one and a nervous breakdown in the other. In 1880, He worked in Budapest for Tivadar Puskás, a telephone pioneer who we can thank for the telephone exchange. In 1882, now 26 years old, he moved to Paris and began working as an engineer for the Continental Edison Company. His job was essentially to reverse engineer electric hardware brought over from the States and improve them. During this time, he began working on the induction motor and created numerous apparati that utilized rotating magnetic fields. He couldn't turn any heads in Europe with his induction motor, so a few years later, he headed westward to the United States. One of his employers gave him a letter of recommendation directed to Edison. It read, "I know two great men. You are one of them. The other is this young man." An immigrant from Europe with only a letter of recommendation? Well, he gave him a job, but Edison didn't really expect much out of Tesla. At first, he was given real chump work, but eventually Tesla worked his way into working on and solving some of the biggest technical boggles that the company came across. Eventually, a certain well-known event occurred. One day, Edison told Tesla, "Hey, our direct current dynamos or generators aren't as good as they could be. If you improve it, I will give you $50,000, which was the modern-day equivalent of $1 million. Shortly after this, Tesla submitted a design, which Edison accepted happily. However, when Tesla approached him for his payment, he replied, "Oh, Tesla, you don't understand our American humor," and promptly brushed him off. But then he did offer Tesla a raise, so that's awful nice of him. How much of one? Well, Nikola was making $18 a week at the time. His raise? After a raise, he'd be making $25 a week. Big money, my friends. Well, Tesla didn't say a word in response to this offer. What did he do? Well, without any more discussion on the matter, he turned right around from Edison and walked out on the spot, quitting the company. He was left having to take a job digging ditches to feed himself. His total time at Edison's company? 1 year. He rose up through the ranks, caught Edison's attention, offered these designs, and all of that was within 1 year, and he was in his late 20s. Now, fortunately for Tesla, he did achieve some financial backing not long after this, allowing him to invent, research, and what have you. In the years to come, the main crux of the brewing between Edison and Tesla was over the choice of electrical currents. Edison's empire was built on direct current. Tesla was in favor of his own creation, alternating current. The main issue with direct current, or DC, from here on, is that it was highly limited given how it would require larger gauge or thicker wiring in order to supply structures over a longer distance. Additionally, you had voltage drop that was an issue, and as distance increased, the voltage would drop off and taper away. You would need an incredibly large density of DC power plants or at least major generators to maintain a region's electricity, thanks to the voltage drop. We're talking one every couple square miles here. I mean, it would have cost a lot just to get these plants up and going. Also, you would need separate lines to supply high voltage machinery, such as, say, a motor, and ones for less power-hungry things, such as lighting. Alternating current, on the other hand, could transport a large amount of voltage and, using transformers, transform it into what was needed. Back to the people behind this. Now, before I go further, let's get something out here in the open. Edison wasn't an evil man. Was he a jerk? Well, yeah, but there were rumblings how Tesla was much the same. I mean, he was very OCD, and you could imagine that he was probably very irritable at times. Thing is, Edison built his entire empire and wealth around DC power, and AC was basically aiming to chop its head off. Heck, he was the top dog in making batteries in the industry as well, which is what DC itself is grounded in. Electrical puns withstanding, of course. Tesla and Edison's competition of promoting their respective electrical currents began what is known as the War of Currents. This entire conflict between their technologies is important to the game's story, of course. However, even though politically it grew ugly, much of this was due to the big cigars involved in things. Edison had several industries tied to his DC power, whereas Tesla's initial cash flow came from an entrepreneur known as George Westinghouse. Edison set about smearing Tesla's AC as best he could. One infamous case involved him electrocuting animals to death in order to exhibit how dangerous alternating current was. The phrase electrocution came up here from execution by electricity. Edison preferred a less classy moniker, being Westinghoused. I think that calling it that as a sign, as I mentioned, this was more so between the money barons butting heads, opposed to Tesla being mauled by Edison himself. Moving forward with the technology, Tesla built the first hydroelectric power plant, which was at Willamette Falls Station. The hydroelectric mechanic itself is pretty simple. With the traditional power up to this point, coal would be burned to generate heat, which would produce steam from water. The steam would be fed into a turbine, which would rotate a magnetic apparatus around a conductive medium. The magnetic field in high motion would result in an electric field being placed on the wire. In the case of hydroelectric, the water would do most of the brute work, and you would remove the cost of coal, steam, and what have you in the process. Tesla himself was quite the conservationist at heart, so this was something he always wanted to pursue. In fact, he always wanted to, quote, harness the power of Niagara Falls. Well, not long after Willamette, he built a hydroelectric plant at Niagara Falls and did just that. Shortly after this, a demonstration was held in Germany, which resulted in electricity using alternating current being sent nearly 110 miles away and being utilized. Once word of this got out, investors poured in favor of Tesla's current. The war of currents at this point was over, with both sides nearly entirely out of cash. However, in his twilight years, Edison would admit that AC was indeed superior. Tesla, though, he kind of held on to the grudge. After hearing about Edison's death, he said, quote, he had no hobby, cared for no sort of amusement of any kind, and lived in utter disregard of the most elementary rules of hygiene. Well, I'm guessing the OCD kind of drove him to that latter end of the insult. In the years that followed, Tesla did a number of neat things. He created his magnifying transmitter, which led to many badass photographs, as we'll see soon. Also, the wireless remote control, wireless power transmission, the spark plug, and he also learned how to use the ionosphere and manipulating radio. Yeah, after the war currents ended, he began heavily pursuing radio technology itself. You might say, wait, Marconi invented the radio. Well, this is another bit of a patent slap fight that was all too common at the time. Marconi had a very, I guess you could say, weak rig put together for transmitting radio, whereas Tesla had a pretty superior piece of hardware and submitted his patent application in 1897. In 1900, it was granted. Marconi filed his in November of 1900, but was shot down due to Tesla's existing patent. Marconi repeatedly revised his application and resent it 3 more times in the years to come. His company, the Marconi Wireless Telegraphy Company, began to strongly develop itself within Europe. Its stocks increased in value by nearly tenfold, and he drew investment from Edison and Carnegie. He also transmitted the first radio signal across the Atlantic. Tesla, upon hearing this, said, "Oh, Marconi's a good fellow. Let him continue. He's already using 17 of my patents." The U.S. Patent Office, however, decided to turn around and give the patent to Marconi and take it away from Tesla. Why? Well, the popular theory is that money talks, and there was a lot of talking going on from Marconi behind the scenes. For inventing the radio, Marconi later won the Nobel Peace Prize. Tesla sued him in response, but he was lacking on funds by that point to pull together a sturdy legal team. The case itself fell through as a result, but hey, wait, it ain't over yet. Marconi's company sued the U.S. government in 1943 in an attempt to snag some cash. The angle was that the government used its patents without its permission in World War I. And what did the U.S. government and court system do to get out of this? Well, they turned around and said, "Oh, hey, remember that patent we gave you over Tesla? Well, we're changing our mind now. It's not your patent anymore," and thus the case went out the door. Ah, legal systems. Anyhow, back to Tesla. His final major claim to fame was Wardenclyffe Tower, which you should definitely remember for the near future. The gist of it? Transatlantic wireless telephony, or communication, as well as demonstrate the potential of wireless transmission of electricity. Remember the magnifying transmitter I mentioned earlier? Well, that was basically the heart and soul of this technology. Unfortunately, the setup was incredibly expensive. By this point, in 1905, his patents on the AC power were expiring, so this cash flow of royalties he was making use of were drying up. Also, given the big gamble it represented, entrepreneurs weren't too keen on it. The lack of investments and overall implosion of the project played a very critical role in Tesla's depression and downfall. Also, his biggest financial backer was J.P. Morgan, who later pulled out, contributing to its collapse. That is also something you should make note of regarding J.P. Morgan being a financer of this. Morgan was helping funding it, thinking the cash he could make out of this, but then he learned that Tesla wanted to transmit wireless electricity and information for free, and that promptly made him do an about-face. He supposedly asked Tesla, quote, "Where is the meter?" Tesla stared at him, shrugged, and didn't answer. I find it funny because you'd think this concept would have been covered in earlier stages, and I doubt Tesla flatly lied to Morgan's face, though. He doesn't strike me as the disingenuous type, you know? Also, back-to-back important stuff here, folks. So, Wardenclyffe Tower was never completed. The funding got pulled and it collapsed. He made an attempt to build another one known as Telefunken at Long Island, and Telefunken was more of a success than Wardenclyffe, particularly because it was finished. And also, he managed to construct a few towers and establish wireless transatlantic contact between the US and Europe. Unfortunately, it was torn down because the government was concerned about German spies figuring out the technology or tapping into comms. Also, due to the war, Tesla's few remaining backers, who were European, were now cut off from him. As a result of his worsening depression, his OCD tendencies became even more severe. Case in point, in the later years, he became obsessed with the number 3 and multiples of it at all times. 3 napkins at all meals, 3 meals a day, circle the block 3 times before entering a building, etc. So also, people in this era, they weren't too knowledgeable about OCD or developing mental illness, so they saw this as Tesla going batshit crazy. As you can imagine, this wasn't a big draw for the investors. Tesla also had several other lesser-known inventions and innovations in the year to come, ranging from a proposed death ray to schematics of a VTOL system used in modern jets, as well as a basic level of geothermal energy harvesting. Most, though, weren't kept record of, because given how he, relied on his memory so heavily. He also remained intelligent in his later years, but his genius developed just a tiny smidge of crazy town. He also cut himself out from society at large and ended up developing light and sound sensitivity as he reached in his 80s. Finally, on January 7th, 1943, Tesla's heart gave out and he died at the age of 86. Having lived a life of celibacy, he had no children. But hey, history has a knack of being a buzzkill at times, so let's get back to the actual glyph. This is pretty straightforward right here. Drag the cursor around, light bulbs turn on. Solving this leads us to our next picture, Wardenclyffe Tower. This was where Tesla made his first attempt to tackle the wireless transmission sort of thing. And you remember the financial backing got pulled out from JP Morgan and it just completely fell apart. We've also got 3 quotes off the sides here from Tesla. The first, fights between individuals as well as governments and nations invariably result from misunderstandings in the broadest interpretation of this term. Second, money does not represent such a value as man had placed upon it. All my money has been invested into experiments with which I have made new discoveries enabling mankind to live a little easier life. And third, misunderstandings are always caused by the inability of appreciating one another's point of view. The best way to dispel ignorance of the doings of others is by a systematic spread of general knowledge. With this object in view, it is most important to aid exchange of thought and intercourse. We solve this puzzle by finding the miniature version of the next picture, which is located just above the door.
He found it in Croatia.
So there you go. Just in case you were having doubts, Tesla had a piece of Eden. He found it in Croatia, meaning he found it when he was younger, because from what I gathered, he wasn't too big on visiting home, and there were long stretches where he completely broke off all contact with his family. So that's what I'm taking away from this hint. We have here is a shot of Tesla with his magnifying transmitter. There's also a Caesar cipher at the bottom of the picture. It reads, he used it to develop a bottomless source of energy, Telefunken wireless station. Telefunken was the place that got shut down following Wardenclyffe due to fear of Germans figuring it out. Now, the next glyph will give us some more info on Telefunken.
He found it in Croatia. They would find it in his lab.
Our final glyph for this video is found in Forli, on the eastern side of the structure adjoined to the San Mercuriale. What does it mean? Well, this is Hebrew, Olam Haba, the world to come, after the arrival of the Messiah in Judaism. The basic gist is that the world itself is evil or flawed, but the future will be replaced by a perfect world, or essentially what you could call heaven on earth. Next up, Titans of Industry. Edison. Archives, eh? What is it this time? Well, we need to solve a bit of a puzzle first, as usual. This time, though, the game starts getting even trickier about the Caesar cipher. Gets crafty with hiding the clues. More Tesla-related stuff, as you would have guessed. So our cipher, the picture on the left has it, 4 = 1. In case you were wondering, that's the basic blueprint or layout of his AC dynamo or generator. From that, we can solve the cipher. Now, let's look at that letter. Go ahead and pause if you want to browse this. So, Tesla's piece of Eden is number 4. Next, this map again. Every time we take out a few bulbs, a quote comes up. Edison, creator of DC energy, accuses Tesla's AC current of electrocution. JP Morgan revokes funding for Tesla's Wardenclyffe project. Edison creates electric chair to prove the danger of AC current. And now, footage of an elephant being electrocuted. Enjoy!
He wanted everyone to know the secret, to set us all free. They used it to drive him insane.
After that is, oh, Mark Twain. I'd recognize that glorious stash anywhere. What's he, wait. More cipher. They used it to make Tesla go insane. The organization took his research. Alien Property Custodian Service. What? Does that mean Mark Twain is a Templar? No. Oh, dang it. Okay. Well, this ties into the previous glyph. Telefunken was shut down on the grounds of German spies being able to figure it out and or use the technology against the US. The apple was used to make Tesla go all crazy town, and the organization, air quotes emphasized, took his stuff. The Alien Property Custodian Service was established in 1917 by Woodrow Wilson, the same year that Telefunken was shut down. Also, though Tesla was a citizen of the US, get this, upon dying, this same Alien Property Office confiscated all of his property and inventions. Interesting, huh? It all fits together, man. And another coded document from Ford. So, remember how I mentioned the ciphers got tricky? Here's one with a slight twist. It's not as bad as what we'll see to come. And got us symbols this time. Well, they're pretty distinctive. The first thing we'll spot regarding it is on the Dearborn Independent Periodical in the bottom left. On the left side, we see 2 lines and 2 dots. But where's the number relating to it? Well, look at the Model T picture, just to the left. See the 2 on its hood? Yep, that's it. Tricky, huh? Well, solved, right? Well, no, not quite. This still has a trick to it. Once we line up the two numbers that we have now have a blank situated over them. How do we solve that? Well, it's a matter of filling in the blank. We have some additional symbols to pick from in the little choices here, and they aren't displayed on the wheel. Put in the ones that are missing within a pattern, and we find the ones that fit in. And that's done. Well, let's wrap this up and read the letter. Oh. Oh. Ooh. Jeez. Well, Tesla's apple was given to Ford. And, you know, I don't think Ubisoft did a good enough job of making him sound downright horrendously evil. Don't you guys agree? Ugh, jeez. That's pretty freaking evil right there. Well, you've got Edison, J.P. Morgan, Ford, as well as what's mentioned here, Harvey Firestone, founder of the Firestone Tire and Rubber Company, all in cahoots. Best golf buddies forever. But that is another bus into Crazy Town we'll have to save for another time. Let's review the footage we have so far. I'll play it 3 times and we'll end it there. I'll see y'all next time.